see, the Ultraverse 20th anniversary was this year. We all remember the Ultraverse. Some of us trying to forget it. But it was one of the first companies to come along to really challenge the big two. Big Marvel, DC rivalries going on. And you know, they created their own universe for the first time. And some of the gentlemen here on our panel worked on this universe. We have Dave Olbrich, who is the publisher. We got Mr. Allard Welch, who worked in the art department and did a lot of making for the Ultraverse titles. And of course we have Joe Allard.
Yeah, that's Allard.
Not the artist. Who worked in the coloring department under, was Gone Fishing, right?
Yeah, a couple different ones. First Gone Fishing and then Prism Riot. We changed our names.
Oh, it's not?
We got talk about
Okay, I'll talk loud enough.
we got like as soon as you go to Prism Riot. Hello.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Now I'm really going to talk softer. So we basically started with the Ultraverse back in 1993, 20 years ago in June with Prime and Mantra, Nightman. I'm sure you remember all these titles. And today we're going to kind of talk about where it was, where it's going, where it went, and just some memories about what we all remember about the Ultraverse. So we can start with Dave here. What do you remember about coming into the Ultraverse? What was your first memory?
Well, obviously, we just come out of, or just had suffered through the constant browbeating of the image creators, and we're looking to basically not get beaten about the head and neck every day. So the idea of the Ultraverse was basically to have something that the company could own. We started publishing Malibu Comics in 1987. So by the time we got to 93, we were already a 6-year-old company, and we had nothing but licenses and create our own projects under our belt. And we thought it was time to give the company some value and to try something big and splashy, and to try to keep up with Dark Horse and Valiant and the other companies that were our competitors at that point. So that was the impetus, and then we had a bunch of different plans, and we decided on one, and we had a really good team. Me and Tom Mason and Chris Allm, the editor-in-chief, and Scott Rosenberg made a really great team, and we ended up coming up with an idea to put a bunch of really skilled comic book writers in a room and craft a comic book universe from scratch. So we went to Scottsdale, Arizona and did that. And one of the several untold stories of the Ultraverse is one of the Ultraverse founders was going to be Wes Craven. Yay! We bought Wes Craven a plane ticket, and he was ready to get on the plane and go with all of us to Scottsdale, and he had a last-minute Hollywood obligation that he had to take care of, and Wes fell out of the program. So
That's a shame.
that would have been cool. I spent some time this morning going through what our publishing plan was. We launched in middle of June, 1993, with Prime #1 by Jerry Jones, Len Straczewski, and Norm Breyfogle. Then The Strangers by Steve Englehart and Rick Hoberg, and Hard Case by James Hudnall and Jim Callahan. The following month, we launched Mantra #1 by Mike Barr and Terry Dodson, and Freaks #1 by Jerry Jones and Ben Herrera. August was Exiles by a 4-writer team, me, Tom, Chris, and Steve Gerber, and penciler Paul Pelletier, who's still working. Obviously, a lot of these names are guys that were either legends or still working.
Yeah, it seems like the artists have really moved on to something big.
Yeah, well, some of them have, some of them have not. August also saw us launch Prototype #1 by Tom Mason, Len Straczewski, and David Ammerman. September was Firearm by James Robson and Cully Hamner. Well worth your time to go back and get those firearm issues. Probably consistently the best written book in the series, mostly because there were so few of them. But you could see James Robinson working on a lot of the stuff that he'd later work on in Starman and a lot of other things that made him a big star. September also saw the launch of The Solution, which is a team book by James Hudnall, and according to the internet, it was all penciled by Derek Robertson. That's not my memory of it at all. October, we launched Sludge #1, written by Steve Gerber and penciled by Aaron Lopresti, who's still working today, and worked consistently since the day he took over Sludge. And then we also launched Nightman by Steve Englehart and Derek Robertson. I know Derek worked a lot on Nightman. November was the last, I think, of the initial launch books, which we launched Solitaire #1 by Jerry Jones and Chuck Johnson. I couldn't find anything we launched in December. And then by January, we were launching Rune #1 by Chris Allman and Barry Windsor Smith, and Wrath by Mike Barr and David Ammerman. So that was the rollout, and it was really aggressive, and it was both its strength and its curse, ultimately, I think.
And one of the things was they were all creator-owned, right, with Ultraverse, or that was one of the ideas?
Well, the company owned the stuff outright.
Right.
But there were very deep, intricate, complicated contracts that I wrote with a lawyer to make sure it's legally binding, but I had to come up with all the terms to make sure that the guys that got the character designs got long-term interest, the guys that did the first issues or first appearances of the characters got long-term interest. There's lots of pieces of the pie that were sliced off for the various creators, so that, God forbid, there was a Prime movie, those guys would all be able to see decent participation from the money that came in or whatever. So all the founders had a piece. Even, let's say, if there had been a hard case movie, even let's see, now I'm going to run out of the name. Dave Gibbons would have gotten a piece because he was the guy that designed did the original character design. So the idea was to take a giant pie of money and slice it up in a more equitable fashion than we'd ever seen before in the comic business. And I think we did that, and once again, a great strength and a great piece.
When did Gil Kane's book come into play?
Gil Kane's book, The Edge, that was Bravura.
That was a Bravura.
Oh, that was a Bravura. So that was strictly creator-owned.
Yeah, that was
Bravura was completely creator-owned, and that was Dan Brereton and Walter Simonson and Howard Chaykin and Gil Kane and Stephen Grant and Peter David and all those guys.
Okay.
their anniversary is next year.
I don't think there's anybody getting together for a Bravura.
You never know, that could be the
A
new
little Bravura party, I don't think.
You bring all those hats I have. How about Larry, what was your first introduction to the Ultraverse? What brought you?
My first introduction, I mean, it was a couple of things. You mean as when I came into the company?
Yeah, sure.
Well, when I came into the company, I actually met Hank at one of the last, what was it, not the Ape Show, but WonderCon.
WonderCon up in San
I met
Francisco.
Hank at WonderCon, and I showed him my portfolio. And at the same time, he and another company, Valiant, wanted me to do some work for them.
Okay.
And I decided to go with Malibu because I had already had working relationships with Dave and Chris, because my first comic book I ever worked on was their partnership with Full Moon Entertainment.
Oh, Dollman,
Yeah, the Dollman, and I did, me and my friend, my roommate at the time, who goes by J.H. Williams now, we actually came into the industry together. And he was the penciler and I was the inker, and it was Demonic Toys. Was our first book that we did. That was both our first projects. He went on to DC, and then I went over to Malibu, and you know, that was a great time in my life. You know, that was very, very cool. So that was my first introduction to the comic book company there, and that was in 1990. And then when I came into the office in May of '93, that's when I started working on a lot of the Malibu label, the protectors, and
The Genesis stuff?
the Genesis stuff. Yeah, I was working on a lot of that. And then after some of that had finished, I went over to Ultraverse and started inking a page here, a page there of like Parquet's, Mantra. You know, I was happy to see, you know, I was one of the first inkers to ink Terry Dodson, but they wanted me to ink like Al Bay, and I was like, no, don't. And that was my first introduction into the Ultraverse.
Awesome. Joe, how about you? When did you come on board?
I came on board in the coloring department, I came on board in like mid to late '93. I think they were ramping up the coloring department for the Ultraverse, which was, you know, started in '93, as Dave said. And I actually had already worked at Malibu. I applied for a job as an internship, or as an intern in the art department, because I was just out of college at the time. I was really young, and I wanted to be in the comic book industry. So I applied for an internship, and they found out I had shipping experience. So a couple awesome ladies who I can't, like I said, it was college, it's a little foggy from back then. But a couple awesome ladies said, we'll bring you into the art department as an intern. You know, it's unpaid, but we also have this job in the shipping department that is paid. And I said, well, I really want to be around the artists because I want to learn the craft. I want to be, you know, I want to be a penciler, I want to work in the comic book industry. And she said, you know, back then there was not a lot of email, so all the artists were FedExing their stuff back and forth, and the editors were always in the shipping department. You know, so she's like, if you're back there, you're going to get to know the artists, you're going to get to know the editors, you'll still get to know everybody, plus you get paid. So I said, okay, getting paid sounds awesome. So I took that job, and I worked in the shipping department for probably about a year. And then, you know, I started showing my portfolio around to the different editors.
I look awesome in this lighting.
Yeah, it's a big spotlight just for Dave. Let me back out.
Funny. So I started showing my art around, and then eventually they started ramping up the coloring
Thank you.
department. So,
Maybe hour.
is that the timer?
We're not moving up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Less than an hour.
What the?
And I won't like
Somebody has to keep walking around, apparently.
Which ghost is that that's doing it?
The lights
Creator.
keep coming on and off.
Awesome.
The lights keep coming on and off.
They're trying to tell us something.
Yeah, who's
Anyway, I eventually took my test as a colorist, which was, you know, I had been an artist and been studying art, doing pencils, markers, all that stuff, but I had never used Photoshop. And so Mike Giles, who was our fearless coloring manager, he said, don't worry about it. You know, he really set me at ease. I said, I'd never used Photoshop before, but obviously he'd seen my portfolio, knew I understood color and shading and form. And he said, don't worry about Photoshop. They took one of the senior colorists, gave me about 10 minutes of instruction, basically, and said, you have 4 hours to color this page. And I was like, holy crap, there's no way I can do that. I don't know Photoshop. And he
The
said,
work.
yeah, exactly. But he, you know, but he said something that really calmed me down, and he said, I don't care how much you pay, how much you color, it's about what you color. He's like, so if you color this one panel on this, you know, 6-panel page, and it's awesome, I can tell that you're good, and the speed will come with time. And so that's what I did. I focused on that one panel, and Mike sat down after the 4. Actually, I think I colored maybe 2.5 panels. And Mike sat down after about that 4 hours, and the first thing he said was, "You sure you've never used Photoshop?" And I said, "Yes, I swear, awesome." And so I waited, you know, with bated breath for about 2 weeks before I got the call from Mike that said, "Come and join us in the coloring department." So
Well, that was
jumped
kind of
in
what it
and-
was. What Malibu was actually kind of known for, starting the whole
Exactly.
Computer coloring, yeah.
Well, that's why Marvel purchased us, I believe. They would know more about that, but I believe
It's
that was
completely untrue.
Okay.
It is 100% untrue.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to keep believing it because I like that story better.
Well, we can keep telling it if you'd like. That's perfectly fine with me, but no,
Well,
that's
so
not
it
true at
was
all.
to put us out of business, basically.
Well, we were in heavy negotiations to be purchased by DC Comics.
That's, yeah.
And
Yeah.
DC Comics,
Maybe it's DC Comics.
the DC Comics market share plus Malibu's market share would have significantly made Marvel the #2 publisher in the business. Marvel's having enough financial troubles as it was. They had a problem with their self-esteem issues. They didn't. So I think basically Marvel bought us just to keep us out of the hands of DC Comics. If we'd have kept rolling the way we were rolling and we'd have gotten the support from DC, we could have kept Marvel in number 2 position for a significant period of
Wow.
time. I think that was their biggest fear.
Yeah, that definitely makes more business
Well,
sense.
considering they walked in and tried to shut down the coloring department 3 days after they bought us or
Oh,
whatever.
really?
So
Yeah.
why buy us for something they're gonna shut down
Right, and then
immediately?
we
So,
lasted maybe a year and a half, or about 2
Right.
years after
Well,
that.
thanks to Mark Grunwald.
Oh,
That's
really?
that's a whole, yeah.
I remember though being there and hearing the rumors about the sales, because of course we weren't privy to all the details.
No,
but
of course
we
not.
heard that there was a Marvel DC bidding war, and personally, I didn't know the details that we would have survived on with DC, but I wanted DC anyway.
Right.
I was a huge Batman fan. I was like, man, that would be awesome. And of course, it went the other way.
Yeah.
You know, we all know the end of that story.
We do indeed.
We do. What
But,
about, just
the-
getting back to coloring real quick, Dave, why did you guys want to have that sort of coloring? Was that brought in specifically because it was new technology, or?
We were always big on adopting new technology. I mean, we had inter-office email in 1989.
Wow.
So a long time before anybody else knew what the hell was going on, we had these little Macs on our desks. And when somebody sent an email to everybody, all of the Macs would ding. And so he had this office where it was big. It was a big open space, and we were all just sort of spread out all over the place. And there were some walls and stuff, but I mean, mostly it was a big bullpen. And if somebody sent an email to everybody, they all would ding simultaneously, and it got to the point where we'd all go gang mail, and then we'd all just open it up and sit reading the same document on our desktop. But yeah, we got into. We had a bulletin board. A computer bulletin board for people to for writers to send their scripts in.
That was 89?
That would have been 88. We had our bulletin board, so we were way out at the front edge. I mean, we were always stunned that we were more technologically advanced than any publisher at the time. You'd go to Dark Horse and they'd have 2 or 3 Macs. DC literally had a Mac on a desk, one of those little rolling portable desks. And you had to schedule time with it. And they'd roll it from one editorial office to the other at the scheduled time, when every single one of our people, down to the least among us, had a Mac on their desk to perform their work. So we were always out at the front end. We got Photoshop when it was Photoshop like 1.0, before they even called it 1.0, they just called it Photoshop. There'd never been an upgrade when we took the original test. We wanted to get into color comics, but so many of the our sales were so low that it would have been unprofitable for us to really get into color without finding ways to bring down the costs. So we first started working with John Nee, who eventually became Jim Lee's assistant and helped build up Wildstorm Studios. He had a coloring house called In Color, I believe, and we did our first color things with him, and he showed us how it might work. And then we found out about Photoshop, and we actually had the people from Photoshop teach all of us in a big room like this. Like, they had Photoshop up here, and every executive, I think, except for Scott, and everyone down the line. I mean, I think we were 3 steps deep into the staff. We're sitting there, and some lady was teaching us how to recolor photos, because it's all she knew how to teach. It's like, it was designed to change the way photos looked. Obviously, it was called Photoshop. And we're all going, okay, how can we use this to color comics? And she didn't know how to teach us, but we could see from the various techniques she was teaching us that we could adapt what they were teaching us. And so I had to learn Photoshop so that if Joe came to me and said, I can't color this page in this amount of time, I'd go, bullshit, yes you can, or not. So you needed to be able to understand a certain amount of how the technology worked and how the people were going to work with the technology in order to make good business decisions, that's all.
Was that your decision? Did you just say, we're gonna use Photoshop? Did you just kind of just...
Yeah. We had some guys originally, I think, working freelance, and then we just sort of started bringing people on who could color our books, because we knew that if we had them in-house and we could pay them and keep them coming, we could produce our own comics quicker and cheaper, and so it was the only way to make money with our low sales. And then eventually we started running our own film, so we didn't have to pay a guy to run film. And then we started hiring guys to be in-house letterers and in-house inkers so that we could scrunch down the production time. Because what most people don't know about comics, financially, is there's this thing on the budget line item which is called WIP, which means work in progress, and the enormous amount of money you have invested in work in progress for a comic book company of any size is pretty astonishing if you're paying any kind of advances. And I think advances are really the only way to work with artists. They deserve to get paid for their work, but if you finish your work in January, the publisher's probably not going to release it until April. It's a long time to do without that money. So you got to try to shrink your turnaround time as much as you can to keep your work in progress budget lower. That's some inside baseball stuff, I apologize.
Well, that's what I loved about Malibu, was that everything was there. The pre-press, we had everything. We did film outputs, we did everything right there. And I remember even before, I mean, you're talking about technology, but I don't think we had scanners. I remember the giant camera where we actually take the photos of like Larry's inks to get them into the computer. We didn't have a
11 by,
scanner.
or 11 by 17 flatbed scanners, when we were doing it, were really expensive. I mean, them cost nothing now, but they did. That guy's got a question.
You know, so you were saying that Malibu morphed into what? Into the Ultraverse?
Well, no, Malibu Comics was the publishing company. So I was just looking at our releases on the internet for 1993. And so when we were releasing all of the Ultraverse books, like when we were releasing Solitaire #1 and Prime #6, we were also releasing Dinosaurs for Hire #12 and Protectors #10 and Ninja High School in color #12.
And the Protectors.
Yeah, so we had lots and lots of different things we were doing. The Ultraverse was just sort of one bushel basket of stuff that we're doing. We did Robotech for years, we did Ninja High School for years.
Star Trek.
We did Dinosaurs for Hire for years. We were the first publishers of The Trouble with Girls. We did tons and tons of, what's that?
Like all the eternity stuff.
X-Mutants, for anybody that has any affection for X-Mutants.
Oh, yeah, I still love that damn book.
Yeah, that book's a weird bird. having had a hand in the relaunch. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then Bourne continue with other companies, or?
I don't think Rune could have gone anywhere because Rune was part of the Ultraverse.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, when Marvel bought them,
Yeah.
there were some.
There were probably some appearances of
issues
Rune,
that
right?
came up.
Yeah, it was a Boone
And
Conan.
Marvel quickly
Oh, that's the
destroyed
one.
all the
Rune
characters
Conan,
and concepts.
Yeah.
Exactly,
But-
yeah. There were a few cameos though. They showed up in some Marvel
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once Marvel bought them in 1994, you know, they wanted to merge some of their characters, do crossovers.
Doesn't seem possible now, but when Marvel first bought us, we said, okay, we think we might be able to get some more traction with this stuff if we can get started some Marvel characters. And the first character they wanted us to use, anybody want to take a guess?
Juggernaut.
Thor. They wanted us to have Thor, because nobody at Marvel in 1994 and a half knew what to do with Thor. And now it seems inconceivable that Marvel would like give away Thor, right? 2 giant movies and the Avengers, but yeah, they wanted to give us Thor because they didn't have the first clue what to do. We ended up taking, I think, the Black Knight and Juggernaut and a few other characters that nobody wanted. But yeah, they really wanted to give us Thor, and we sort of said no. Who knew?
Yeah, I remember the first time I actually inked Thor, that spotlight in an Ultraverse book. It was the Ultraverse, Ultraforce Avengers.
Yeah, Ultraverse
crossover.
Avengers, sure.
And I got to ink this double-page spread with that George Perez had penciled. That it literally took me 3 days just to do the buildings, because it was just phenomenal, and all the work that he did on this page. And there was just a small little Thor and prototype flying in the air together.
Yeah, if you go to my Facebook page, there's this really ugly picture of me, but behind it, you know how they have the little picture and the big
Yeah.
picture? My big picture is the Ultraverse and Avengers crossover thing that George.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't have any buildings in it, it's just the
Yeah.
character. You know, he draws always draws that wall of mat, you know, just
Yeah.
characters everywhere.
I gotta
I
say,
got rid
the
of
coloring
those.
department, we all cringed when enjoying the work.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, there was
Yeah,
so
right.
much detail and little stuff, but it was still great to color.
And there was no layers back then.
Exactly, yeah. And only one Control Z, now you can Control Z a million times.
Well, quickly, we can talk about, when Marvel came in a little bit. In 1994, they bought the company outright. We talked about how DC was also trying to, take over the company. So once Marvel came in and, was trying to can everybody, you were saying Mark Grunewald had a huge hand in, trying to save Malibu. What was the story behind that? I mean,
It was, thanks to Mark, that's a good thing. Mark had an open mind about these things, but the truth is, Mark was trying to pull his own editorial house's fat out of the fire. He got behind on a bunch of deadlines, and he couldn't get.
we're fixing that. Now we're fixed.
Okay.
I apologize.
He couldn't get the book that he needed. He needed to get a book or two done, and he couldn't get it to Ireland and back or to any other colorist and back in time. And he called us and said, "I need this book by Monday morning." It was Friday afternoon.
Oh, my God.
And we said, "Yes, we would love to stay employed. Let's color this book over the weekend." And they just threw all the resources of the coloring department behind it and sent it to Mark, and Mark couldn't have been happier. And so more and more Marvel books, especially the ones that were behind deadline, got shoved at our coloring department. And so it was just a matter of our guys were better than Marvel ever gave us credit for, which was always true, by the way. And they just discovered it because they got pushed into a corner.
So is that maybe where the story about they bought you for the coloring department came from?
I don't know.
Because that sounds logical, right?
Sure,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
all of a sudden they start throwing all their coloring work at you.
Sure, yeah. I think it's because the pundits and the press at the time couldn't figure out where the value was in Malibu. Like, Marvel had more than enough characters, they didn't need our characters. Marvel had entire infrastructure in New York, what did they need additional editors and guys like me for? So nobody could really figure it out, why would Marvel do this? And Marvel was doing a bunch of inexplicable things, but they were still trying to come up with reasons. And I think the coloring department was the obvious, easy thing to target, would be my guess, but I'm sure that contributed to it.
Yeah, and back then there were so many, even still today, there's so many rumors, that.
Well, nobody else had an in-house coloring department. I mean, nobody else had an in-house, but it wasn't long. I mean, it didn't take more than 2 years, and everybody that was doing coloring housework out of house, I mean, everybody who had a big coloring production capability was all getting eaten alive by guys doing it in their garage. So that wasn't going to last long anyway. I mean, Digital Chameleon and all the other big coloring houses all either went out of business or downsized to almost nothing because the cost of a Mac and the cost of sending the stuff back and forth and all that got to be so cheap that there were 8 million guys in their garages coloring comics, and so they couldn't compete.
Did Marvel give you guys credit for the coloring in any other books?
Yeah, oh yeah.
There
I
was
mean,
cover.
publicly. I'm not sure they ever gave us much credit privately, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I would have a list of the coloring teams under there,
Yeah.
I'd say pencil maker, and then it would say colored by, and there'd be, our team name would be at the bottom there, for a while, or I guess a couple of years.
Yeah, and for a while there, we had night and day shifts too.
Yes, I was gonna mention that, yeah. I think
Day
we're the
shifts, we
only-
were running 3 shifts. You
Yeah,
could
there's
walk
that
into
3
Malibu
shifts,
at any time of the day. It was like a factory. You could walk in there any time of the day or night,
Yeah.
and there'd be at least 10 Macintoshes running as fast as they could go coloring comics.
Yeah, luckily I never had to work the graveyard shift, but there
Yeah,
were lots
but
of people that
you-
did, yeah.
There were 8-hour shifts,
Yeah.
round the clock.
I was pretty much 10 a.m. to 2 a.m.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah.
Going through.
Yeah.
So, yeah, lots of work.
Funny, I thought you looked familiar sitting back over there.
Okay.
They read us from Mountain Color.
But yeah, also when Marvel started sending us their books, when we colored the Malibu books, we colored as awesome as we could on every book. We rendered it, we went to town. And then when Marvel sent us their books, they had like coloring levels because they didn't want us to spend that much time on their cheaper books. So like their lower end Spider-Man books, they considered a bronze level coloring, where you just go over it really quick with an airbrush, so you'd have a light dark and you're done. So you could just get it through the system really quick. And then their more popular books got a silver, and there was a gold level for their really top-notch, Spider-Mans or whatever they were doing. So it depended on what book we were working on. Sometimes it was just bronze and it was just flat colors. We did some silly, like, I don't know if they were doing Disney, remember Little Mermaids, and just a lot of crap that came through there, honestly. It was for me, it was kind of a downgrade. And even though I was able to color some awesome artists coloring for Marvel, it was almost like I wasn't getting to do our full, our full talent or let everything fly, because Marvel was just about the bottom line. They wanted this stuff, I don't care if it's flat color, I don't care what, they just wanted it through the system. So it was, coloring for Malibu was much more enjoyable than coloring for Marvel. I'll just say that.
I don't like. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit, okay, so after the acquisition by Marvel, you talked about how they wanted to give you Thor, but you took Black Knight and Juggernaut and all that kind of stuff. How autonomous were you on doing some of these, like Godstorm and this kind of stuff, where it was like the crossovers between the Marvel and Malibu characters? Was that, if it had Ultraverse characters, was that something that they just gave you guys and you were doing it out here?
Yeah, I mean, primarily, I didn't get to sit in on as much of that editorial stuff. It wasn't long after they purchased us that they purchased Heroes World, and the entire industry exploded. And I, unfortunately, was deeply involved in that mess. But yeah, they didn't really mess with us. They gave lip service to the fact that they wanted us to succeed. So they thought that by giving us what we wanted in terms of Black Knight and Juggernaut and crossovers with the Avengers and Nightman crossed over with somebody.
Wolverine, Gambit.
Wolverine and Gambit. And I mean, they were pretty generous with that stuff, and that was a point at which, you gotta realize, 90s comics generally sucked. I mean, they just did. They was just terrible. Marvel really didn't care that much. I mean, we got a little bit of flack, and there was no movie money, so there was nobody looking over editorial shoulder on the Marvel end going, don't do that, that's going to screw up Little Johnny's movie deal. Yeah, they didn't mess with us much. We came up with our own failed program.
And just, not a knock on you guys, I mean, it's like, just as a fan, because I read all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I'm so sorry.
But it was just the Ultraverse stuff,
right.
And I loved the Strangers and Nightman and Hardcase and Prime and all that kind of, but after the acquisition, it just seemed like, except for the stuff, I mean, George Perez draws anything, and it's like, wow,
Sure, yeah.
I mean, that book was great, but most of the other stuff, it just seemed like it had lost kind of the spark that I loved in it when it was just the Ultraverse.
Yeah. Some of that, I think, had to do with the falling sales. So we had less money to spend on the artists, and there was a real competition on page rates at that point, which ended in about 95. It's never gotten any better, by the way. So we only got crushed on this page rate thing just when we really didn't need it to happen, but it really happened at the worst time for us, so we couldn't really get the best guys. So the stuff started to look really bad, and as the stuff deteriorated, the sales went down. It was harder to get the writers even to make their deadlines because they had to take other jobs. So it was this just downward spiral of crap landing on top of crap.
I could see that.
You know what I'm saying? It's just natural.
Back in the day, I had all the aces from your Solitaire #1.
Yay! Solitaire was a fine book for like 6 issues.
So that was the final downfall? Crap.
What was all black?
Dropping sales, yeah. I mean, the bottom fell out of the market. I mean, for Malibu to have survived without a purchase, we would have had to. We were talking about this. Tom and Chris and I were talking about this not long ago. We would have basically had to move out of the office we had and downsize to probably a dozen employees, and lay off almost everybody. At one point, we had almost 100 people working there, and we would have had to cut the staff by at least 75%. And we would have lost our coloring department, which means those prices would have gone up. I mean, fixing it would have been just the most monumental undertaking that you can imagine. And one of the things I've discovered as a truism of life is the hardest thing for humans to do is go backwards. Like once you get to a certain point, if you make people go backwards, they'll do crazy shit to not go backwards. I mean, people die just to prevent not going backwards. So companies have the same problem. Going backwards is a very difficult thing to do. And we took a check instead. So.
But even after Black September, you know, a lot of the rumors and still today, a lot of people talk about how, you know, Marvel was the one who was responsible for destroying the Ultraverse.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know is the same people who worked on, basically as far as editorial in the company, were the same people who went over to Black September. You know, they came up with the ideas for Black September, you know, and executed Black September, and then relaunched Mantra with, you know, a lot of the original people, even though I guess he didn't really stay on very long. But as far as like, as far as those rumors, what would you guys, can you add to that, I guess? I mean, you know, it's, you hear all the time that, you know, Marvel had taken the Ultraverse and completely destroyed it.
I think cooler heads with less ego and less geography between them might have been able to make a better deal out of it. But there were so many things working against us, not the least of which was Marvel was starting to circle the drain. And you gotta realize after they bought us, it wasn't long they declared bankruptcy, and they had 10 times more investor, big money guys, you know, playing puppeteer than we ever did. And so they had it way worse than we did. And they were in no position to help us try to fix things. And certainly we didn't have the tools to fix it ourselves. So I just don't think there was really there was no way for it to survive. And I feel badly that there must be some secret about why it hasn't been able to come back.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's the contracts.
No. Well, I know, you know, back, because I was one of the last people out of the building, literally, because they were taking the computers away when they closed the Santa Monica office. That, you know, there was a lot of animosity in New York that, you know, Malibu was kind of like the bastard child, that we weren't good enough to run with Marvel, that the characters weren't good enough to be part of this universe, that, you know, the people who worked there were less than worthy. And I mean, you know, a lot of the people who are there now seem to be, you know, were there back then, and, you know, throwing it out there. I don't know if it's completely true or not, but it seems like there was this, you know, Ultraverse was down here, Marvel's out here, and why bother with something that's really not worthy of.
Oh, I had a Marvel's executive tell me specifically, don't forget who bought who here. When I tried to when we were having a business discussion. So it's like, it doesn't matter what you say or what your contribution is, you're Malibu, we bought you. If you didn't need us to buy you, you know, yes, there was a definite feeling that Marvel did not integrate the guys at the top, the guys way at the top, really wanted it to work. The guys just under the guys at the top couldn't have wanted it to work less.
Right, right. I knew my job was in jeopardy when I saw John Romita come into the office, when all the Marvel editors came into the office, and I saw John Romita came into the art department, and he just looked around and said, oh, okay, you know, what are you working on? And I, you know, showed him everything, and next thing I know, 3 months later, they're giving me my severance and say, hey, it's nice knowing you, and we'll keep you on as freelance. And that lasted for about 6 months, and then that was it. I was done.
One of my favorite tidbits about the demise of Malibu is the fact that Marvel brought in a hatchet man named Joseph King, which meant I was fired by a guy named Joking. I wish that wasn't true.
So Joe, what was your last day at Malibu like last week's?
It was tough. I was there until they closed the doors in December, I believe, of '96, right?
96.
96, yeah. So I was there up until October. Well, like Larry said, everybody around us started, we didn't know what happened. They bought us. We weren't told all the details. Of course, at first it was like, oh, everybody's going to stay on. It's going to continue as this autonomous, this separate, Calabasas faction of Marvel or whatever. And that didn't happen. Very quickly they started laying off editors and artists. So as a colorist, it was tough because all of our friends and coworkers were getting laid off all around us. And then we didn't really know. We heard rumors that they were going to keep the coloring department. That's what we heard, but of course we didn't know. And then, so we were okay as a coloring. After all the editors and artists were gone, it was just the coloring department left. And then they actually moved us. We moved us from the big building that we were at. I think just
I think it went upstairs.
upstairs, exactly, to just a smaller office because it was down to just the colorists. And then we were okay for I think about a year and a half. We just kind of sunk into this mode where we were coloring some Malibu stuff, a lot of Marvel, stuff. And then all of a sudden, colorists started getting laid off. And we were like, what the hell is going on? Because we thought we were Marvel's coloring house is what we thought at the time. And then they weren't saying anything to us, of course, because Marvel said, don't say anything, just lay these people off quietly and let it happen. And a few of us, because we were kind of young punks in college at the time, started to make a bit of an uproar. We're like, what the hell is going on? People are getting laid off left and right. So Mike called a few of us in, the loud, obnoxious ones, and said, guys, can you please quiet down? It's like, I'm going to let everybody know, but Marvel's shutting the doors at the end of December. And, you guys are going to be my last colorist standing, so please stop making a big deal out of it. But I'm going to talk to everybody and let everybody know that, everybody's okay up until this point, and then we're, going to start laying everybody else off, and the doors close in December.
Yeah.
So it was really frustrating, but they were awesome about trying to help us find jobs. They had some people come in and say, hey, look into animation background, look into this, look into that. So they were really trying to help the colorists find new careers, basically.
Did it bring any of you guys into the Marvel fold? Like the best and brightest?
No. What they did was,
Well, Mark Nietzsche is still an editor at Marvel.
are you talking color specifically, or?
Anybody,
Oh, yeah. Mark is
Mark made his name known, having worked at Malibu and worked with the Marvel editors during the crossover period. And then Mark was unemployed for a while, then he went to Tokyo Pop, became an editor there, and then he got hired at Marvel. But I guarantee he wouldn't have the Marvel job editing the Hulk if he had to set up those relationships originally.
Right, okay. Because I work in corporate America and I understand.
Right, they would have had to move everybody to the East Coast, and you can't forget, the biggest thing about this is Marvel was circling the drain. So they couldn't justify hiring us away and displacing. They had to look at those people on the East Coast in the face.
Yeah.
They could chop our heads off with impunity.
Yeah, because once the December layoffs happened with you, because Panicha, myself, Phil, and Dan Shaheen were moved. Yeah, good old Dan Shaheen. Were moved to Santa Monica to work in the advertising.
Right.
So we were still doing editorial, and they had actually said that we were going to take over all the Paramount comics right after Ultraverse was canceled. So we were going to do all the Star Trek books that were currently done at the time.
Yeah.
We were going to do anything that was crossed over with Hollywood, and then it completely changed around as one day, exactly like everything else.
Really?
Yeah, so who owns all the characters? Does Marvel or?
Marvel.
The characters that were owned by Malibu are now completely owned by Marvel. The characters that weren't owned by Malibu, we couldn't sell them because they didn't belong to us, so those went back to the those went back to the creators, yeah.
Because Simonson's doing this stuff.
Yeah, Dave, did you have a question?
No, I was gonna point out, when we're talking about the layoffs.
Bless.
Originally, they were gonna do 3 waves of coloring layouts, so they've set up all of their coloring to be done in Ireland.
Yes.
And
Sneakily, they did
Remember
that.
they sent, what's her name?
Jennifer Schellinger.
Jennifer and Lydia both went over to Ireland.
Graphics, Colorworks.
They told us they were training our assistants, and instead they were actually training our replacements.
By the way, the guy that was in charge of coloring at Marvel, one of the big executives, the guy that told me to keep my big mouth shut because he bought me, I didn't buy him, he was getting a kickback from the Irish coloring
Oh, jeez.
studio. Just saying.
Yeah, when we had heard that they were sending it to Ireland, we didn't understand, and some of the rumors were going on, well, when you work in Ireland, you don't have to pay income tax as an artist. I don't know if this was true back then or it's true now, but so they're like, oh, they can pay them cheaper. Obviously it was cheaper, that's why they were doing it.
It was a big, they had government subsidizing, so essentially they could reduce the pages for a third the cost out the door.
Right.
So why wouldn't they do it? But the thing I was mentioning is we went through the first wave of layoffs, and then all the editors sent all the work over there, and then started panicking when we actually saw the level of the quality. So they tried to shut everything back in, which a lot of the work had to be, had to be pushed back. And so the second wave was completely eliminated, and it was to the end closing the doors.
Exactly, yeah.
I was in the final wave two, closing the doors with you. So, yeah, there was a lot of mistakes, things that they thought they could do better, and they don't need this, and then it was an eye-opener for a lot of the people. It was a mad scramble.
And one of the things that never gets talked about, I can't believe this is like 20th anniversary, all we're doing was talking about how we died. So I carefully pulled the knife out of my heart.
And then we all died.
One of the things that can't be forgotten is we had a big cash infusion just before the Ultraverse when we merged with something called Acme Interactive, which is a game company. And the game company moved in and we all took up the same spot. So there was always, we had the biggest, funnest office we ever had. We had the comic book side and we had the game side.
Yeah,
The game side.
I
The game guys were all like over there. And they were the very first, one of the very first companies to have the rights to do a PlayStation game. We're talking PlayStation 1, the original PlayStation. And so they were doing quite well until, it's almost like the day that we merged. And from that moment on, they were this gigantic cash suck that did nothing but make things worse for the publishing side.
We also had the video production too. Remember we had the Firearm movie, right? Or video?
Yeah, but those guys didn't cost us anything. It was having a film department was fun, and those guys were goofy Hollywood dudes. One of the guys in our film department is a guy named Ken Dario, and he wrote Despicable Me 1 and Despicable Me 2 with his partner. So he went on from Malibu's film department to be having a pretty successful screenwriting career.
Nice.
We're a Bubble Boy too, but nobody cares about Bubble Boy.
Bubble Boy was funny.
I'm not saying it wasn't funny, I'm just saying nobody
It didn't
remembers.
make no-
That's all. It's 15 years ago or whatever.
20 years ago. So, we had a little downer here. So, to bring it up, what is your favorite memories of working for Malibu in the Ultraverse, and what do you think its place in comics history is?
Well, my favorite memory is one of the smartest things we ever did, which was, my favorite memory is the fact that we crushed Dark Horse, but that's just me being petty and competitive. So, a little window into my psyche, unfortunately. But one of the things we did that was really smart was we picked the day we were going to do it, and then we started to figure out all the parts that had to come in, and we realized, obviously, that if we didn't get our primary customers, and at that point there were still 10 distributors, not just Diamond, there was actually 10 different comic book distributors, and the retailers on board, we weren't getting to get anywhere. And so we had what we called the Ultraverse Conference in this big hotel just down the street from the offices, where we flew in as many of the important journalists as we could think of and find, back when we had comic book journalists. We got all the distributor reps to there. We got some of the top 20 retailers to all come, and we all sat in this giant ballroom and we put on a show. We showed them the most amazing new comic book universe that's ever been hatched by anybody, anywhere, anytime. And it worked. I mean, we sold the first month, those first 3 books, Prime and Strangers and Hard Case, sold 250,000 copies each. Kicked ass. And they were good, 2 of the 3 were good books.
And Marvel's selling like 600,000 title, right?
I don't know what they might have had 1 or 2 titles that were selling that many, but we definitely scored pretty high.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look to see where they came in on the top 100 rankings or whatever it was.
But you guys were like,
We did,
up on their
we
lower.
never made back our advertising money, but we